Hello, and thank you so much for joining today's special webcast, Making Layoffs Without Making Headlines. I'm Robin Erickson, Vice President of Human Capital Center, here with the Conference Board. And today's topic is of particular interest, you could even say passion of mine. I've actually been studying layoffs for the last 20 years, ever since the layoffs that started after 9/11. And I actually wrote my PhD dissertation on the topic of engaging and retaining downsizing survivors. So this is something I'm really excited that we're going to have a conversation about today. So thank you for joining us. In terms of the agenda for today, we're going to talk about what's working in today's market, both internally and externally when you have to communicate layoffs, how you can minimize the risk of reputational damage from downsizing, and then what type of support works best for those who are being let go and also for those who are staying or those downsizing survivors. Couple housekeeping items. The first is, if you'd like an attendance certificate for today's webcast, please click during the presentation when it says, "Are you listening?" There's a little button that says click. We'd ask you to do that. And then you can also click on the icon to download your certificate. And speaking of icons, you are welcome to ask questions via the Q&A box, and I'll share those with the presenters as we go through. And in addition, you're also welcome to download this presentation for your records. The presentation will also be available afterwards on demand. So with that, it is my deep pleasure to introduce my co-presenters today, Heather Swift from Randstad RiseSmart and Kristen Wynn from Sky High Security. And I'm going to ask Heather to go ahead and introduce herself first.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robin. It's our pleasure to be here with you today. So for as long as you have been studying this world, I have also been part of this world of transformation and change. I'm a senior vice president for Randstad RiseSmart. I've been in the industry for about 21 years, really all around coaching throughout the employee life cycle, specifically helping many, many organizations through change and transformation throughout placement, career type services. And I've been very fortunate to partner with some amazing top Fortune 500 companies, both big and small, small organizations who really care about their individuals, their employees, and the impact. And I've managed to make some awesome friends and colleagues through the HR people representing those companies. And one of my favorites is here today. Kristen?
Thank you, Heather. It's great to be here with all of you. As Heather said, I'm Kristen Wynn, and I lead people success for Sky High Security. As long as Heather's been on the side supporting people, I have also been the one who's been actioning those layoffs. And Heather and I have partnered closely together for the greater part of the last 10 years to ensure that we're helping people to really make a smooth transition to their next opportunity when we find ourselves in the situation of having to do these actions. So I'm glad to be here with all of you today and share any insights that I can.
Well, thank you, Heather and Kristen. I'm quite sure that our audience will find this interesting. I know I'm looking forward to our conversation, as I think we can all share our different experiences with layoffs. And so I'm going to show you that layoffs are certainly making headlines these days, especially in the technology industry, but we're seeing layoffs announced almost every week. You can see some of the very interesting headlines. A horror movie come to life on CNBC. But yes, layoffs have definitely been a fact of life in our country for a long time. And I mean, especially like we were talking about after 9/11, during the Great Recession, after 2008, very shortly during the beginning of COVID, and now we're starting to see them again. And, there are predictions that the layoffs are going to continue through Q4 of this year. So the one thing we don't want to have happen in organizations is that they make the headlines, right? And some of those things that you've all seen, employees being told via text or via a group Zoom call that they've been laid off, being, locked out of buildings or systems. And even in one particular organization, people were let go, and then a couple of days later, they were asked to come back because they hadn't done such a good job with planning those layoffs. So We also know that former employees can share their feelings, right? They really have many outlets now to share how they're feeling, and the more outrageous the headline can be, the more likely it is to get picked up by the press. So, Heather, I'm just going to ask you, what are you seeing and hearing from your clients?
Thank you. Yeah, I love how you said that, sharing feelings. Yes, everyone has a voice right now with social media, which has changed since we've been doing this for over 20 years. So that is definitely a call to action for employers to really do right by their employees and to come out ahead of the news, so they're being transparent and more honest about the situation. I mean, there's definitely lots of posts on LinkedIn, TikTok, Glassdoor, you name it. So it's interesting because the drama captures the headlines, but what we're not really hearing about as much are the companies that are doing everything possible before a layoff is even necessary. Those really practicing redeployment, reskilling their employees, looking at talent mobility. So that's a big change we've seen over the past 10 years, especially. A layoff should really be that last effort before having to let go of employees. And the companies we partner with, they take great pride in hiring great people. The onboarding is huge, for all that training, everything it takes to bring someone on board to a company, and to just have to let them go like that. It's not a decision any company takes lightly.
Completely agree. And one of the main reasons why companies don't take it lightly is I think they realize what a big deal it is for an employee to be laid off. And we thought that this would be an interesting time to ask you our first poll question, which is, just for the context, remember this is completely anonymous survey, but have you personally been laid off? Your choices are never, thank goodness, just once, or unfortunately 2 to 3 times, or sadly 4 or more times. So we'll give you just a few minutes to fill this in. And I'm hopeful that it's either never or just once. That's what our hope would be. But we do realize, too, that the people dialing in here probably have a vested interest in layoffs. Either they see them coming, or they're interested in some of the alternatives, like you just mentioned, Heather. There are alternatives. In fact, we actually published a short report here at the conference board about alternatives to layoffs, and I'll share that link with you at the end of the presentation, because I don't actually think that everyone knows that there are alternatives to layoffs.
That's true. And have you been let go, Kristen or Robin? I've been let go once, and ironically, I got a call from a recruiter that morning who said, "Are you ready for a new opportunity?" And I said, yes. I was working at a staffing firm at the time. I said, "I'm ready for a new opportunity." And that day at 4 o'clock, I got let go. So I thought he was a spy. He was not a spy, but it was an interview with an outplacement firm. So I had my own reality check of being let go, bringing my stuff home on a New York subway, the whole shebang. I'm in the Northeast here. I'm in New Jersey right now. So it was great practice for getting into this business, actually.
Well, I was with consulting. I was a management consultant before becoming a research analyst 10 years ago, and I was either laid off or furloughed 4 times. So okay. I'm in the sadly 4 or more times category. Kristen, what about you?
So I have been in that furlough spot, absolutely, back in the sort of financial crisis in 2008. But I actually remember my mom being laid off, and the way in which the company handled that communication to her and her reaction to it to this very day. And so I think it probably has also informed some of the way that I've approached conversations with people now in my career. But I think, as we'll talk about, it goes beyond just the person, but then affects the people around them, right? Which informs the way that they also react to the situation.
100%.
I didn't know that, Kristen. I had the same experience with my father of watching that impact twice in growing up, and what impact it has for the whole family, and heads of household, like all that change and stuff. So that definitely shaped our careers, Kristen, I think.
So let me just share the poll results, and let's see about our audience. Well, look at that. Only 4.3% say that they had been laid off 2 to 3 times, 35% just once, and 61% never, thank goodness. And so that's good news. That's what we were hoping for, right? To to be able to share the information, but we also wanted you to be aware that we were personally aware of what happens when people are laid off. So with that, I just want to go ahead and ask Heather, why do companies persist in laying people off?
Well, I think the quick answer obviously is to be seen as profitable immediately. Market expectations. I was with a customer the other week and he said, oh, it was February then. And he said, oh, every February, everyone braces for change because based on their fiscal, cycle, their year end, that February is the month where they typically do some round of layoffs. And so it's rough when employees know that, and there's a trend with that. It's really great when companies can, obviously do everything until that, but change drives our business. Change drives the need for outplacement, whether it's mergers and acquisitions. Sometimes companies are putting dollars in different pharmaceuticals, or there's just so many things that can happen where an employer has to focus differently, then jobs will be impacted in that way. We just published our 2023 talent trends research, and 11% of employers say that they expect to have to downsize in one form or another. And, we hear that a lot of damage can be done when it's not done well. It impacts the brand, but equally important, it impacts how people feel about their former place of work and how the current employees feel about it too. So there's a lot that can go down if not done well. So we're here today to really share how do we take care of everyone that's going through this whole cycle, from the managers doing it to everyone. And when people have said, of those that have actually done layoffs, 1 in 4 said that was probably the biggest pain point of their job for that organization. So nobody takes that lightly, and we're happy to be able to share some of best practices, because we don't want any organization to jump straight to layoffs, right? We want them to kind of figure out, how can we transition skills? What does that look like? We really want it to be a last resort, and then we're here to help navigate, that process with anyone that needs the help.
That's it exactly. And what would you recommend if layoffs do have to happen?
Well, when they have to happen, there's a whole structure to really put in place. Ideally, it starts, further down the line of making sure that the CEOs and the leadership has been very transparent. And we have some slides here. I'll be talking to this after our next poll here, but I think it really starts with leadership, really highlighting, what's going on, what is the state of the union, so there are no surprises. And we've seen some companies do it very well. We've seen some companies do it very poorly. And this is not something that should be hidden, right? If a company is struggling, or what areas they're trying to grow, or if something's happening, obviously timing is everything. But we really want to make sure that there is a plan in place, that management's on board, that the managers are prepared to deliver those difficult messages. There's definitely tips to really support that. We'll be talking about that in a moment, and to really do everything you can to support those employees as they exit. Kristen and I have a big senior colleague of hers, Michael Alicia, who I partnered with for years as well. And he always talked about the employee experience at his former employer, how when companies spend so much time onboarding, you want to give the same love and care as they exit. And how important that is, because it impacts just everyone involved in a big way. So we'll talk about some of those points in a moment.
It also impacts how people perceive the company when they leave. In terms, just how the love and care. I love that. The love and care you give them is the same as the onboarding. Love that idea. So let's go to our next polling question. Which is, as a leader manager, how many downsizing or restructuring events have you played a role in managing or implementing for either your current organization or a previous organization? So your choices are none, 1 to 2, or 3 or more. Kristen, I don't know if you even, I'm assuming you would be in the 3 or more category.
I would unfortunately be in the 3 or more category, Robin.
Yes.
It's
I've never actually played a role in a downsizing or restructuring event, given the positions I've been in, but I've never actually had that kind of a role.
Yeah, and there's many reasons for having to have that conversation with an employee, whether it's, organizationally, you're making some changes to the way that you operate your business, which has people impacts. To what Heather said, it could be a merger or acquisition, right? Bringing two companies together, which again changes your go-to-market structure, the way that you run your operations, the locations in which you operate the business. There's a number of different reasons, but I think to Heather's point, when you're in those conversations and you bring a level of empathy and authenticity to the conversation where they truly feel like you care. And I always think about or say, based on the way that we separate, I would love to be able to work together again in the future, right? If an opportunity presented itself, because a lot of times employees are impacted to no fault of their own. This isn't a performance conversation. And those are actually the most difficult conversations to have or understand why it's happening to them. And if you separate in a way that leaves actually a good bond between the company and the employee, and so a lot of times that employee did have a great level of performance. If, conditions change, roles change, business operations change, you may have the opportunity to work together again in the future. And that's always the way I sort of want to leave those conversations.
It's like the boomerang employees, right, Kristen?
Yeah.
They go, come back, and we see a lot of that. We see people even coming to us, refiguring out what they want to be when they grow up, and then sometimes go back to the same organization because they realize, oh, well, we can use them in this spot now. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you guys. That's great additions to add while we were waiting for the results. So let's just see what those are. So our results are 15% of the people on the call have never been involved in this, 30% one or two, and the vast majority, like Kristen, have been involved in 3 or more. So I think that that sort of gives us a sense of who our audience is. And with that, then, Heather, I'm going to turn it over to you to start to talk about the best practices before, during, and after a layoff.
Great. So are we on the right slide here? I think so, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a few bullets to share, and I don't want to read all of this to you because many of you have been there, done that. But for those that are newer, or maybe you haven't had to do it in a little while and it's coming up, the idea of having to structure a layoff and be part of that, and really, HR and employee relations as the people part are really kind of helping drive the ship. It's so important for being transparent from the very beginning. So that way it's not a shocker. So a lot of this planning is ideal before the need even arises. Making sure, we talked about this, there's alternatives for looking at how to use your talent, redeployment, reskilling, all of those good things. And before the layoff, you really want to keep building that trust and really building on the idea that people are in the know, that no one is keeping secrets in that way. And then, of course, when we do discover that that absolutely we're going to need to go through some change, that reductions are going to happen, to really have in that place of clear communication, who's saying what, who's leading the charge, and that senior administration has to be responsible in that way to really come up with good messaging. Everyone knows what to expect from whom. If they're seeing stock prices tanking, people are going to start asking questions. So better for HR to be prepared to know, okay, what do we need to tell people? What can we tell people right now to kind of help them kind of brace themselves for what is the new world of work going to look like here? And obviously for managers, training managers is a really big part of this. It's something that we really take pride in and want to make sure that they know how to say a message with empathy, with care, while still holding up the leadership position of the organization. And I know sometimes people wonder, should HR be part of that delivering message? And absolutely, yes. So typically, I would say like old school days, right? People would go in person, and typically like Kristen and I, Kristen would be with a manager. The manager would deliver the message. Typically the manager would leave. Kristen would be there to speak to the employee being impacted. They would have a conversation. Then frequently I would come into the office and then speak to that employee to talk to them about next steps and how we're going to help them moving forward. Now in this virtual world, it's very different. So we'll be talking a little bit about that, but you still want your managers trained on how to deliver those messages. Any thoughts around that at all, Kristen?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The other thing that I would say is really important is the news can, no matter if you're expecting it or not, the news is still shocking when you first hear those words.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I always say to people is, you don't have to write everything down. I will document it and share everything afterward with you, because they're trying to absorb a lot of information all at the same time. And so knowing that they're going to receive everything, offering to meet with them, again, if they have questions, just telling them, I don't expect you're going to have all your questions prepared right now. I think that gives them also a level of comfort. And like you said, training managers, no matter how many times a manager has done this, some managers tend to do it very well. Other managers tend to still just be really nervous in the conversation, no matter how many times that they've done it previously. So you're also being a support for that manager, having to have the burden of delivering that news to an employee. And I think that's also very, very important to keep in mind.
Yeah,
Can I
absolutely.
add?
Please.
I just wanted to add one other thing about that question that had come in around whether or not HR should be involved. I think it's a best practice, as Kristen was saying, sometimes managers are not that comfortable doing it. And I think if HR is there, they can help manage the conversation, because I think that oftentimes the person being laid off, they're in shock, but sometimes they react with anger. Sometimes they, the response could be any sort of emotion, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's just important to have HR there as a best practice.
I highly agree. And I mean, I have had some examples where, the manager and the employee have disagreed about the termination, and they start to get into a conversation about who was right. And that's not a healthy conversation to have. And so I think having HR there to sort of be the mediator, if you will, or able to sort of bring down those heightened emotions, being that sort of neutral party in the room, being able to, to kind of calm the manager and also be the support voice for the employee is extremely important.
Mm-hmm. I've never been part of a reduction where HR was not leading it and involved with it. In fact, I've had a situation once where I was on site where it was an SVP who had to notify a direct report, and he didn't have the courage to do it. And he gave it to a peer of the person who was going to be notified. And this was in the middle of a very large restructuring. And the head of HR flew down that hall to go grab that man and teach him a really quick lesson about representing the organization and having to deliver the difficult message. So even our seniors, our senior executives sometimes need some coaching and support to say, how do you feel about this? Do you know what you're going to say? Do you know how you're going to say it? Just to give the best optimal experience for that employee, because they deserve that. They deserve someone who can sit there and feel uncomfortable, because that person's life is about to change. And sorry that you have to deliver it, but you are representing the organization. But HR is always there to save the day, right, Kristen? I know sometimes the managers can't get out fast enough, and HR is left going, okay, we're going to go over benefits and then answer questions.
Yeah. And, I always tell my managers, this is going to be really hard for you, but it's going to be harder for the other person, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's just keeping that lens to it as well, that, no matter how uncomfortable or how difficult it is for you, this person who's being notified, they're going to have a really tough day today. And I think that helps to sort of just bring that lens to it, where they can understand that, yes, it is difficult for them, but it's ultimately there's a bigger sort of emotion at play, and they need to just keep that in mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I move forward the slide here. I just want to highlight a few things here before we move on. One is about, for large scale events, we've seen a real shift with CEOs standing out and really, going to the press first and kind of sharing. And I think that probably that the Brian Chesky from Airbnb really raised the bar, because he came out with a beautiful letter explaining what was going on and the support they're going to give people that were impacted. And we've seen some other organizations like Stripe, like Peloton, also their CEOs releasing letters to say, hey, this is full transparency of what happened, what we're doing about it, how we're helping our people. And I think people can understand that things change. Every company is there to try to, grow. People don't want to have to shrink. So when they're saying, hey, we built for this happened, we need to accommodate that change, and this is what we're doing, I think that really sets that organization apart in a different light than someone who's just all of a sudden doing massive layoffs without any going to press, or doing it all on Zoom, right? We saw that the other year of, people just doing it not so right. Robin, I think you kind of mentioned that. So where possible, you definitely want to do one-on-one, notification meetings. You're not sending emails and text. The caveat now is that we have this virtual meeting room, right? So we have heard situations of someone's being notified and then a spouse or partner hears something going on and they jump in on that Zoom call. Kristen, can you talk to a little bit about that? Like, how do you try to secure a safe space for HR managers to have those important conversations virtually? Because it's been a whole different world, especially since COVID.
Yeah, so at some point, there's just no way to avoid it, but you try to do the best you can. So, we always ask them, are you in a space where you're, comfortable, to have a conversation that, it's quiet and you're able to, speak with us. I did have a situation where when the person got on, they were actually in the car driving their a parent that they were a caregiver for back from a doctor appointment. We asked them if they wanted to reschedule. We offered to give them a call when they were home. And they said, no, they wanted to have the conversation. And so, we did. And ultimately, the conversation actually went really well. We were very supportive. I offered to have him call me later, gave him my mobile number, sent him everything, ended up talking to him 2 or 3 times post that conversation. And we ultimately separated on just very good terms. Sometimes there's no way to avoid that. I have had a situation as well, Heather, where the person put us on mute and was clearly speaking to a spouse and then asking questions. And I just said, I'm available to answer any question you have. Or, again, offering that follow-up opportunity, being firm that the decision has been made, but also being supportive. I think you try to do the best that you can, but ultimately, as Heather, you mentioned, with COVID, the working environments have changed. I'm in an office today, but not everyone is going back into the office. And so you just ultimately don't really know where people are until they get on that conversation. As much as you expect them to maybe be in a quiet space, they just may not be. And you just have to sort of be prepared to either maybe adjust the conversation slightly to a different time when they can be in a space that they can have that phone call, or just understand kind of how to mitigate those other factors that may come into play. And again, I think being really supportive of the employee is, ultimately the best approach.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for those examples. I can't imagine your reaction when you heard that, mom is sitting next to this individual. But, when we think about how COVID has shifted a lot of the typical process of, what we've done before. And Kristen, we were part of a very large restructuring of 500 people where everyone met with someone on site. And then we were there on site for a week. Like it was, you and your team managed it so very well. And I know that even though it's different virtually, that it's still important to have EAP numbers ready, right? It's important to have outplacement there available to get people moving forward as quickly as possible. If you feel that someone could harm themselves or security is an issue, like all the resources are still there. We just have to kind of pivot and use them a little more uniquely in that way. But suffice it to say, information is important. People have so many questions about, well, how do I call for unemployment? Do I still get my benefits? What about severance? All of that. So it's so great to have everything spelled out because you know what they're going to ask, and to really have that on a one-page sheet to hand out. Is that one of your best practices, like posts for your career, to have one go-to place for information?
It is. We always send an FAQ document to the employee. So we send their notification letter. We send them a frequently asked questions sheet, which tends to talk about all of their benefit transition. That's always a big one, is what happens to my benefits? When do those end? When am I going to receive information on COBRA? They ask a lot about unemployment. So we do just provide them very general guidance on unemployment, that, we do not make the determination. They should file those benefits with the state. And, any other questions that we just have seen come up over the years. We also provide them with information on the EAP service and let them know that is available for them and their family members. And then Heather, specifically the one pager based on the outplacement program that we are providing them access to, alongside the information that lets them know that they can start the program at any time, which I think is actually a really unique and valuable piece of information for them to have. As you mentioned, we partnered together on a large action event, 500 people. But I think one important piece of that event was it was during an acquisition, and people had actually really different notification periods because the work was transitioning at varying times over the course of a year. So in some cases, people actually received 9 months of notice that their position was going to transition. So they were able to meet with you or your team on site to learn about the services that we were going to offer, but they ultimately could put those services on hold and then actually start them at a time either closer to their exit date or when they felt more comfortable to do so, so that essentially the clock wasn't used for those services when they weren't fully prepared to transition yet.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point. And one thing that came out of reductions in force like that was that we became very flexible in letting people even get their branding up, done up front, to get their LinkedIn updated, get their resume written for them. So at least that branding piece is done. Then we find this, the stress of the shoulders kind of goes down because they can focus on getting their job done, because people will start doing it badly by themselves if they don't have access to the support. It's like dangling the carrot of outplacement. Oh, you have a coach, it's going to write your resume, but not yet. You have to wait 7 months or what. And your team was always so great and really putting through that as soon as people wanted help, they could get the help. And then we started really pausing the time clock. So like you said, once closer, then they could really use all the services or resume as they needed to do so. I think people really appreciated that.
Yeah.
Heather, before we move on to talk more about outplacement and how incredibly important it is, a question came in, which is about during the layoff event. How do you handle the conversation if the employee is disgruntled or emotional?
Kristen, that's all you.
Yeah, so I think the best advice, this absolutely happens. It absolutely does. The best advice is to try to mitigate the emotion as much as you can, and to offer to meet with them again. And I think that tends to work because, again, on the day of the conversation, the emotions are just at a heightened all-time state. And there was really no point in arguing or trying to talk through it because they're not ready to listen. And I find if you give them 24 or 48 hours, even if all they want to do is vent about the event or what happened, or they, again, just don't understand why they were selected, giving them that personal opportunity to spend time with you, to do that, to feel like someone is there supporting them, that is the best advice that I can give. Is if they are disgruntled, if they are highly emotional, if they are angry, they're not ready to have that conversation at that moment. They're not ready to listen. And really anything that you continue to try to say is probably not going to land well and may just continue to sort of heighten that emotion. So what I find is best is to let the person know, I understand this is a lot of information that you're taking in right now. I'm going to go ahead and send everything to you. Why don't you have a look through it? I'm going to go ahead and put some time on your calendar for you and I to meet again tomorrow or the following day. And I find that when you then get into that next conversation, they may still be angry or upset, but some of that immediate reaction has subsided and they're more ready to have a conversation with you and then potentially to start focusing more on what's next for them versus the exact event that happened the day before or 2 days before that. So that's probably my best advice for when that does come up in that situation.
So, and I just want to bring in one other really interesting question that came up. And this is for both of you. Is it okay to say I'm sorry during these conversations? Or is that not appropriate for someone representing the company to apologize?
Yeah. So we tend to say you should not say, I'm sorry. You should not apologize. But what you can do is recognize the way that they're feeling. And it's very valid, and they have absolutely every right to feel that way. But you should not apologize for the decision, because you should own the decision that you had to make, that the company had to make, and you stand by that decision. But you can absolutely recognize the way that they're feeling, or that this is very difficult. And sometimes I will say, I understand this is very difficult to hear, especially because this is in no way related to your performance, right? Because a lot of, why me? I don't understand. I've had good performance. And the hardest message you can deliver is that this had absolutely nothing to do with your performance. So I would tend to say, I would not advise apologizing, but rather recognize and validate the feelings that they're having.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you said that so well, Kristen. And we have a whole manager training that we put through, and how to handle the different reactions that some people go into bargaining or denial, and just repeating the message that this decision has been made on the highest level of the organization, and to have empathy. But it's hard because it's like you want to make someone feel better, and it's not the place to do that, unfortunately. It's a very difficult line to walk with empathy and that. And Kristen, I'm going to move forward here to sorry, I jumped the gun. We have one more slide here real quick before we get to your kind of deep dive here. So Robin, did you have anything you want to talk about kicking off to outplacement? Because I know you're very familiar with this field as well.
Well, I'm excited we're going to talk about it, because one of the things that's most important to the downsizing survivors is the perceived organizational justice. And are the people who are being laid off being treated fairly? Are they being taken care of? And there's that survivor guilt is very, very real. And morale drops often when you're on a team or in an organization and there's just been big layoffs. So I think outplacement is hugely important to help, not just with the layoff victims, but also with the survivors. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say about it, Heather.
Okay, thank you. Well, I've been doing, involved with outplacement for 20 years, right? So I've seen it change, but the one thing that really remains consistent is when someone enters service with a provider, the whole goal is to really change the prescription of their glasses, because change is very scary. We talk to people who have been at one job for 30 plus years, people that, especially even now pandemic, that haven't looked for a job post-pandemic yet. And everything is truly virtual now, so much so, more so. And when we can change that prescription of the glasses from fear and uncertainty and self-doubt to the prescription of curiosity and optimism and hope, and help them transfer skills, and it really kind of gives them this whole, almost career makeover, if you will, that, wow, I can learn new things. There's a place for me out there. And we are truly all recyclable, Unfortunately, sometimes career life changes for us, not on our own terms, right? We're part of a RIF or part of a reorg, and that happens. But where outplacement comes in, which is so great, you have a coach dedicated to helping you be your best version of yourself, figure out how to transfer those skills. Do you want to be an entrepreneur? Not yet? Well, let's give you some information on how to be an entrepreneur while you find your next job. Do you want to possibly retire? Not yet, maybe down the road. There's just so many options where we can really mirror and match coaching teams with any person's dream, whatever they want to be when they grow up. We can help them do that. And a lot of people, once that pain subsides and that loss, that sense of losing the work family and their title, they can really kind of seep into a place of enjoying time to relook at their career, and of course, this is assuming that they've been given a generous severance, that they're not living paycheck to paycheck, which many Americans are, but 63% are paycheck to paycheck. So if you are able to enjoy the gift of time, the career insights you can get to really function in today's crazy changing market, the world of work is always going to be evolving, and we want people to evolve with that. So I think that's one of the best gifts employers give when we're able to do outplacement. And if the three of us are close friends and I'm let go, and you see me struggling by myself, trying to do a bad resume and just kind of struggling along, that gives you a very different feeling about your organization, because you're thinking, wow, that could be me. I could be in the next RIF, and look at her having a hard time. So when you see employees doing well, that they're getting their branding done, they're looking fabulous on LinkedIn, we're having job leads pushed to them, they're interviewing, they're just figuring out like, what is this next opportunity in their careers, whatever it looks like. It really helps the company brand. It helps people move forward, and it's really the right thing to do. I mean, it really is. There's the ROI, but it's a return on impact, not just investment. There's the hard dollars that obviously when people land quicker, you're paying less unemployment benefits, COBRA is a factor. But truly just doing the goodwill of the organization and doing right by people that took many years or even 1 year out of their life to invest in that company, that makes a really big difference. So it's, yes, litigious is one of the reasons, but there's so many other valid reasons that it helps. Also, if we think about how people are, we talked about everyone has a voice now, right? Where do we go? We go to Glassdoor, we go to LinkedIn, you can, Google, TikTok, etc. Everything is out there for us to see how someone's experience was. So before people are joining companies, you bet your bottom dollar that they are talking to everyone they know that was working there at one point in their careers, or that has a friend that got laid off. How was your experience? So there's just so many great reasons to do right by people, and outplacement can be a really great part of that.
And Heather, can I add to that as well? But I think, also, maybe when you think about outplacement, if you haven't worked closely with a great outplacement company, but you think of it as a heavy investment. And there's different levels of outplacement that you can provide. So Heather and I have partnered together on, large reductions in force. We've had executives that we've transitioned out together, and we've also had call center employees that have gone through a transition. And we actually provided outplacement services, again, at varying degrees, different levels of investment from an outplacement, the service offerings that were provided, and the duration. But we've provided outplacement services to all levels of the population, all different types of roles and all different types of people who needed that support. And so there are different ways that you can look at the outplacement services. It doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all approach.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And here, when we look at what are options for those leaving, obviously, Kristen, I'm sure you would agree to this, like, do be as generous as you can with severance because of so many folks living paycheck to paycheck coming out of, especially the pandemic. And just, Robin, what were you saying earlier? It's the first time we're having like a recession and like a labor shortage at the same time. Like, how is this possible? Like, it's a very new kind of world of work, if you will. So the more benefits, the better for sure. And being clear with people still having access to benefits, it's huge. Health benefits, mental health benefits is a big thing. Obviously, we talked about the importance of career support. And just because the internet exists doesn't mean people don't need support. It can be very, very overwhelming for people to lose a job and then be like, how do I even start? When people say, well, tell me about yourself. Like, from the very basics, it's amazing how people that have been executives even come to us and they're like, wow, like, I haven't done this in a very long time, or I don't even have a resume. I kept being promoted. I've never needed one. So you can't assume when you talk to an employee a few things. You can't assume that they will know how to do their own job search. And you can't assume that people are also going to retire. Years ago, I was doing a riff, and they were very young HR professionals at the time. And she said, well, he looks old. I think he's going to retire. And I was like, well, I said, we don't know that. You can't assume that just because there's a little wisdom, in the hair, that they don't have an active younger family, or that he doesn't have great ambitions to be still doing great things with his life. So we can't assume that we know anything about what that person is going to need or want, but just give them the full care and the options to do right by themselves. Anything to add to that, Kristen?
Yeah, I would say actually the point that you made about the labor shortage is really interesting, because in various times we partnered together when we've actually had a lot of hiring going on, and we've reached out actually the reverse way to say, hey, I know you're probably working with a lot of companies, a lot of people looking for placement. We actually have a lot of job openings. Do you have anyone that might match these job openings? So having that connection can actually go both ways, that you can leverage that to support employees transitioning, but also conversely, potentially get a pool of talented people when you are hiring as well through the same service. So I think there's multiple options.
That's so true. Thank you for that. Would you please take us through reputational damage, please, minimizing that? Yeah,
and so I think we've touched on this a little bit, but again, this is likely one of the most difficult events that someone will encounter in their career. And the way that the conversation is handled, the way that the exit is handled, Heather, as you said, with that love and care as they're exiting the business, you know, the social media, the media picking it up. When Heather and I worked on that large event, we triggered the WARN Act. If you've never done that, you actually do need to report to local governments. There's typically press surrounding the event. It will get picked up. But then the subsequent damage that can be done if those employees are not treated with respect and empathy can multiply. So when you're trying to minimize, whether that's in the press or just word of mouth or through social media platforms that now people will use, I think always approaching through the lens of empathy is the right place to start. When we talk about providing that relevant support, again, that's, you know, treating them with that, you know, view of, I'd love to work together again in the future. So that is, you know, the salary, you know, continuation or financial piece. That is the benefits piece. That is providing them with the outplacement services. A lot of times people have not potentially been in the job market for years. That could be 2 years, that could be 20 years, depending on the person that you're talking to. And I would say there's been a massive shift over the course of the last even 3 to 5 years in just the way that recruiting happens, the networking piece. It is extremely important to keep your social media up to date when looking for a role. And that is how a lot of recruiters are able to find and contact people. And it can be a very overwhelming process to think about for someone. I need to update my resume. I haven't actually gone on an interview in a few years. I don't even remember how to interview. Do I even dress the same way? Is it like all of these things, right, can be very stressful for someone. And having that support that can guide them through how the job market works today, how it functions, how to get noticed, keeping your resume updated, how to position your social, even just, you know, how do you dress on an interview, right? A lot of interviews, we used to go into the office. Now they're on Zoom. It's very different. And I think having that person to go to is just, it's vitally important to creating that sense of, again, less focus on what happened in that event and more focus on the what's next for them and how do I move forward. I think also with their friends and their family, see them being treated in a professional, respectful, supportive manner that goes a long way for sort of that, you know, how it gets out into the market, right, from there. And again, just focusing on creating that positive exit experience for them. And when you talk about the survivors, I think, you know, Robin, you mentioned this as well, the survivor's guilt of feeling like just horrible about the fact that the person you ate lunch with maybe for the last several years won't be there anymore. But also they want to know, if this ever happened to me, I'm going to look at how you're treating other people, right? Because that's how I would extrapolate. If this ever happened to me, that's how I could expect to be treated by the company. So I think those are all just really important points to focus on. And again, it's really around trying to create that positive exit experience out of a not so positive event that occurred.
Thank you for that. And you mentioned survivors. So let's take a little peek about them, because we know when people are being polled that there is a 41% decline in job satisfaction. There's a decline in the commitment to the organization and job performance. Of course, like Kristen said, you're losing people that you were once friends with and cared about. More than half report increased stress and symptoms. And, of course that's the case, because a lot of people are now having to do more with less. It's not just that the people go away, but the work stays. And then people are left holding that, basket of a lot more work. So how do we support them and what does that look like? So there's a lot to plan to make sure that that decline is least impact as possible for the folks left behind. And there are ways to help them with that. There's a lot of different organizations doing, change management, resiliency, and we are definitely loving that space as well, because it's a way to really come in to support the teams that have been most impacted, and also the managers to have those difficult conversations with those who are left. And that's a big part of it, that once the dust settles and people that have left, or that they've been told that their particular job is impacted, you need to absolutely talk to the rest of the team to assure them that that is all for now, that things have stopped. And Kristen, I'd love to hear your insight into that, because you can never promise there's not going to be another riff, but you want people to kind of regroup and kind of move forward. Anything to share with us about that?
Yeah, so we always plan, as a part of our communication plan, a retained conversation, and that can be small groups, or we've even done that on a larger town hall event, depending on the size and scale of the reduction. And one of the things that I would say is it's best to do that once you know that those notifications of that team have all occurred, because you can go to that meeting and say, here's what happened, those people have been notified, and this action is done. Speaking about that one action, I would never say, you can't ever say that there won't be layoffs in the future, but what you can say is, at this point, we do not have any further plans to make any additional reductions. We will continue to operate a normal course of business, right? So that is performance management, et cetera. But the action today, this is complete. And I think that goes a long way from an honesty, transparency, and just making people feel like there's not going to be this drip of phone calls throughout the day that will happen. They're not sitting there anxious and nervous, and every time they get a ping from someone, or in my mom's case, her phone rang at her desk, right? That doesn't happen. Those are done. And so I think just being able to communicate that clearly to the team, giving them the opportunity to ask questions, and just being upfront and honest and transparent with them is the best approach.
Yeah, thank you for that. And this slide here is really one example of what companies can do to mitigate the risks to really that impact performance and well-being, because people do suffer after that restructuring. And so it's very common, and we have a large global tech client that asked us to provide a series of resilience workshops for managers and employees to help them process the changes and to help them re-engage with what's going on. And that had a really good impact, because the people left are like, okay, they're investing in me. They want to know how I'm doing. They want to help us move forward. So there's a lot of help here. And I know we're about 9 minutes shy of our closure here. So I want to cover a few things. And Robin, I'll turn it over to you for our close here. So also this deck will be available to everybody. And at RiseSmart, we also have a lot of incredible tip sheets and support and resources for you. So at the end, you'll see my LinkedIn profile as well as Kristen's, and we're happy to answer any questions and share content with you as well. So I want to get that in there. But when you think of, okay, fostering resilience, what was most beneficial for the managers? They were happy to learn the practical tools for building resilience for them and the team. Same for the employees. Understanding the stages of change, very similar to the stages of grief, right? Those 5 are with us throughout life through many different circumstances, and job loss is a big one, especially losing the people that we've been working with, and for managers to help regroup those teams, that's huge. The science of resiliency, implementing the actions to help build up personal resiliency for them and for their team members. So obviously when everyone can be on that same page with the managers and the employees, that's just like the best. That's the win-win right there. So when we look at best support for survivors, we spoke about having EAP available, having outplacement available, resilience training, really taking the time. It can be done virtually. We come on site. It can also be done virtually for taking care of those managers, especially if those managers, let's say there's a manager who's also being impacted. So important to notify that manager first, ideally a day before, so they can then hold space for the employees that are also going through change. It makes a difference how we do this timing wise. offering career coaching internally to promote agility. There's a lot that can happen with career work-life coaching. Work-life coaching is a way of kind of bringing coaching further down into the organization to invest in people. And this has really worked wonders for onboarding, for helping sustainability, engagement, retention, all of that. So there's just so many things out there now that can really make a big difference for you. And of course, focus on new internal networks to replace the connections that have been lost. Maybe you can do even virtual group lunches, or have, find out for local people to meet someplace, or have a cause, or do something and kind of think out of the box to regroup. Any last thoughts on that before we turn it back over to Robin?
No, I think those are exactly right. And that is the best way, is, providing all of those resources and, connecting people together so they still feel like they're a part of something. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, Robin, do we have another poll?
We do. We have one more poll. We have one more poll that I'm going to bring up, which is, as a leader or a manager, based on what we've covered today, how confident would you feel now about playing a role in managing or implementing a restructuring? Hopefully, we don't have too many people answering less confident than before. That would be
so sad.
Yeah, I would be very sad, but about the same level of confidence, somewhat more confident, or much more confident. And while our audience is answering this poll, we did get a question that I think both of you might want to consider, which is about the fact that 25% of today's workforce is older than 55. And with ageism being active and very difficult, what suggestions do you have for those who are have been impacted by RIF and facing substantial ageism, but they need to still contribute to an organization, or they still need the salary? So any thoughts on that before we finish this last poll?
I'll add two things, Kristen, that I want you to take that, please. I would say, that to make sure that you are using the current forms of media, like Kristen talked earlier, make sure you are looking good on LinkedIn, that you're using social in a way that really well represents your career. There are ways to kind of edit out certain dates from resumes that might cause people to have, a bigger pause in hiring you. Tapping into your network, I think, is going to be huge. People that can say, oh, yes, he or she is a rock star. It doesn't matter if there's a little more wisdom there, to give them an opportunity. And it's really, I think that's going to help a lot, because you can't be archaic in systems and be scared of technology and compete at that level. But we bring, as older employees, a whole richness of experience and skills and everything that you can help train other people. So there's like 5 different ages now, or 5 different groups of generations in the workforce.
Generations in the workforce. Yeah.
Yeah. It's first time. It's crazy. Kristen, what do you think about that?
Yeah. And I actually think that's a really great point on the networking, because at least through all the recruiting that we've done in probably the last year, one of the strongest places that we've gone is employee referrals and networking. And so I think, encouraging people to keep up their networks, to, encourage them to reach out to their, people that they've worked with previously who can either provide a reference for them, or who may be able to connect them. Even if their company doesn't have anything specific, they likely have a network. And I think that's a really great way to find that next job opportunity, because I think a lot of it goes off of, if I work at this company, then I'm likely to recommend great people that I want to work with, right? Who would also work with this company. And when you think about even employee engagement scores, one of the things we measure is how likely you would be to recommend the company as a place to friends and family. And so you wouldn't want to bring in people that you like and trust and want to keep relationships with if you didn't feel like it was a great place to work. So I think, having people keep up their networks is a really, really strong, important point to combating ageism that might exist, because companies are likely to hire people who are referrals from other employees.
Well, thank you, Kristen and Heather. I wanted to just share. Look at that. 0% said less confident than previously. So that's fabulous. And so I think we've done our job on today's call. Since we are at the very close to the end, and I don't want to keep people too long, here are some closing points. Heather, do you want to go over these real quickly?
Oh my gosh. Yes. Okay. So we don't have a crystal ball, right? So it's really just about being prepared for the unpredictable, and to really, I would say, also tap into your own resiliency and take care of yourself. The health, the mental part, like we know exercise is good, food matters, talking to people, taking time, all of that helps us be very resilient in nature to handle whatever is going to throw our way here. Being agile, and to bounce back when things don't go the way that we think they're going to bounce back. Have your resume ready at all times. Have LinkedIn ready. Don't just have your name and dates. Be accomplishment driven. Help yourself, prepare for that now, because we never know. And I see people that are like, I never thought it would happen to me. And it can happen to all of us. And it does. Very rarely do people, retire without ever having gone through change. So be proactive in that. When I was going through change, a coach I love very much called Shelley Abramson, she said, do your resume, you'll get your power back. So if you're feeling powerless, take control of your branding and your social media. Good communicating. If you're doing the RIFs, obviously tap into us for resources. We're available. We have so much good things to share for you. We are here to serve. That is our whole purpose of why we exist, to help people with their careers and manage change. Preserve goodwill with leavers and support by providing survivors. So provide support, absolutely. Do what you can. And like Kristen mentioned, there are many different kinds of programs. So not everyone has to have a 12-month senior executive program. Like there's so many different ways to offer help in the different levels across the organization.
Thank you for that. And as we promised earlier, here you can connect with Heather or Kristen, or you can even find me. I'm right there on LinkedIn as well, Robin Erickson. But we'd love to answer any other questions you might have. I did just want to mention incredibly briefly, as I did at the beginning, that we have done some research here at the Conference Board on layoffs. Most recently, we wrote, laying off recruiters in a downturn is a dangerous and risky temptation. Oftentimes when organizations stop hiring, they think, oh, great, we can just get rid of our recruiters. And that's a really bad idea. And so that report will explain why that's a really bad idea. As well, as I mentioned earlier, there are innovative alternatives to layoffs. And I think that when you have to convey the messages of layoffs, being able to say that you've done everything you could before having to do the layoffs is important. I mean, paying out huge bonuses and then doing layoffs, or having expensive parties and then doing layoffs, like all of those send wrong messages. So thinking about that. And then last and definitely not least, conducting compassionate layoffs and taking into consideration all the things we've been talking about here today. I just wanted to say we've got some upcoming webcasts you might be interested in. Again, you can download these slides and get the links for all of these. We also have a new app for the Conference Board, TCB Insights, and you can get all of our programming information as well as our research at the palm of your hand, if you're interested in that. Definitely, last but definitely not least, we have coming up on April 26th, the CHRO Summit. This is a virtual event, and we already have some really fabulous CHROs scheduled to speak, and it should be a very, very interesting event. And so with that, I would like to thank Heather and Kristen. Thank you so much for your time today and for all these wonderful messages. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us, and we hope you all have a great day.
Thank you, Robin.